Years ago, I worked at a local casino. A lot of customers could be kind of weird, but this one guy in particular, who spent a lot of time flirting with me, seemed alright. So I agreed to go on a date with him that upcoming weekend. We met earlier on a Saturday night at his friend's house for a casual barbecue. Everything seemed nice, food was decent, but I did notice my date taking an obscene amount of Jello shots. Later, we all agreed to go to a bar and hang out. My first red flag should have been the fact that my date tried to force French kiss me and stuck his tongue down my throat. Stupid me blamed it on alcohol. I know, but I was young, insecure, and just didn't read the situation well at the time. We get to the local bar, and all was okay until they invited me to another party that would take place a few days later. I had other plans, so I politely declined. My date's mood immediately changed and he became very hostile and angry. Within seconds, he began yelling at me, telling me that I was a whore and that he knew what whores like me did at other parties. I was completely baffled. He kept screaming and becoming more violent and went on and on about how inappropriate it was for me to decline his invite and how I was just trying to fuck other guys. At this point, I started to freak out and decided to leave. He followed me out into the parking lot, where he proceeded to yell more obscenities. I told him that I was not going to talk to him anymore, and tried to get in my car. Then things got worse. He suddenly grabbed me by my shoulder and shoved me into the side of my car. Then he took one hand and grabbed me by my neck. While still yelling, he attempted to choke me and called me a whole mess of more bad words. I screamed and told him that he was hurting me and that I would call the cops if he didn't immediately let me go. I was actually amazed that he backed off. I jumped into my car and drove away as fast as I could. I can easily say that I've never been more frightened in my life. The next day at work, I immediately went to the security officers, which were run by the state troopers, and reported the assault to the officers. Since this guy was a regular visitor at the casino, I was not going to take any chances of running into him again. They pulled up his long criminal record and lo and behold, charge after charge of assault, stalking, and even kidnapping. I completely freaked out. They put him on a blacklist, and when he showed up at the casino a few days later, he was arrested and forbidden to come there ever again. Unfortunately, a few days later, I found out from some of my female coworkers that they knew he was crazy and had a history, but they didn't want to tell me because I was a new girl and would figure it out myself. I was livid and felt totally betrayed. Not only that, but I was paranoid that he would come back after me because I had him banned from the premises. He was consistently calling and texting me, leaving threatening voicemails on my phone that lasted almost a year. And it gets worse. Less than 2 weeks after this, another girl I worked with ended up getting kidnapped by another regular. She was not so lucky and was held hostage for 3 days in this dude's basement. He had been coaxing her and gaining her trust for 2 years. Luckily, she was found and recovered well. As soon as I found out, I quit and walked out, never been back, and will never set foot into another casino. Edit. Thank you for all the kind words and responses to this. I've been waiting to share this for a while. It definitely helps to write it out and reflect. All I know is many years later, look out for another and stand up for what is right. You just never know. So about 7 years ago, I had an online date who, after I told him a second date wouldn't happen, decided to show up at my place of work. Needless to say, I was extremely hesitant to dive back into the pool of online dating. In fact, since then I can count on one hand the number of men I've dated from online. But my sister and best friend have both met men over the last year on an app that connects through Facebook. It's used to help filter out catfishes and also tries to find mutual friends of friends that would match what you're looking in for a partner. So over the last month, I've been talking to guys here and there, but hadn't actually found one I was ready to move beyond text with. Then this guy came along. We chatted in the app and he was really nice and seemed safe. After almost 3 weeks of daily texting, I agreed to a date. For the first time ever, I did not stalk his social media profile because I wanted to stop self-sabotaging. I tend to dig so deep that I know too much before the date and have already made my decision that there will be no second date. Yes, I'm extremely paranoid. So I show up to the first date and it's okay. He's mostly quiet and kind of shy, but polite. I know I have a big personality and can dominate conversations, so I decide to give him a second shot. As the week leading up to date 2 goes on, I start getting apprehensive and tell myself not to sabotage this. I realized because I didn't want to stalk his profile, I didn't know his last name, so I text him and ask. He seems hesitant to tell me. He asks me why I need to know. So I respond jokingly that I typically ask before the first date so I can know who my murderer is. But we're beyond that, so now I simply want to know who I'm dating. It takes him a while to respond, but he sends it finally, and then doesn't text again for a while. I keep my promise to myself and don't social media stalk him. I tell some of my friends who start to seem hesitant about me seeing him again. Date 2. I show up to the restaurant, my choice, and it's pretty empty, so there's plenty of parking right up front. I park and wait. I see another car pull in. He drives past all the open spots, my car included, which he knows because he walked me out after the first date. He parks over at the side of the building, gets out, walks past my car, and texts me that he saw me in the lot. It seemed a little awkward, but I ignored it. We enjoy the date and spend an hour and a half talking until the restaurant closes. We discussed where in the city we live, general direction, and the fact that we lived in those areas our entire lives. We also discuss social media, and he claims to not have a social media account. This should have been a red flag since the app takes place on Facebook. Although the conversation was much better, I wasn't sure if I was ready to tell him I wanted to see him again, so I figured I would just go home and think about it. He walks me to my car but walks uncomfortably close behind me. I ignore this and turn to give him an awkward hug and said goodbye. I don't open my car until he walked away. I leave and get out on the road and head home. There aren't many cars in the area, as it's a heavily restaurant-laden area and most are closing for the night. I get to the main road I need to turn down to go to the direction I live in, and I notice a car behind me also gets in the turning lane. At that time, I wasn't going home because I was going to make a quick stop at the grocery store to grab some items I needed for dinner the following night. The light turns red, and they sit extremely far back. I look in the mirror and I realize it's him. No big deal. I'm sure it's just a coincidence that he's going this way. There are other stores this way as well. I refuse to become paranoid and overthink things. So I get to the intersection that the store is at and note that he's still in the far lane. So I hop in the left-hand lane to turn into the store and notice he cuts over 2 lanes to get behind me. That seemed odd, but maybe he just didn't know where the entrance to the shopping center was. Still, really odd coincidence that he'd be coming this way, especially without sending a text or something, acknowledging that he was behind me when we were the only 2 cars on the road. I pull into the store and note that he pulls into a row before I do, and decide to loop around and pull back out onto the service road. I slowly drive back onto the main road, noticing he gets out of his car and scans the parking lot. Not a casual scan like, is there a better parking spot, but a prolonged, where are you scan. I get back out on the road and drive all the way to another out-of-the-way grocery store that I actually used to work at, knowing it's a safe place and in a more heavily populated end of the town, with some friends who will be there to make sure I feel safe. Needless to say, I haven't heard from him since, and I think he knows I know. It took me a while, but I found his social media. His first name was not what he told me. I dug through my texts with him until I found a screenshot that he sent me of an Instagram page which listed mutual followers. Another red flag. I should have remembered that he obviously had an Insta. I started digging through the accounts listed until I found one that's not private and finds his profile. This leads to the ability to reverse Google image until I found his Facebook, which has a different first name and city that is nowhere near where he claimed to live. Time to delete my dating profile again.
The story is really reaching back to a time before all the dating sites were really a thing, and way before smartphones and apps were the center of our lives. Back then, before everything was so simplified, I used to be a longtime member of a certain IRC. For the kids out there, that's Internet Relay Chat Room. These were chat rooms that were more or less embedded on websites, and they were pretty much anonymous, in the fact that all you really had to have was a display name, and not much else. Hell, most of them had a feature that would let you join in as an unnamed guest, and the rooms would sometimes be filled with guests 04235 and such. They were a lot of fun, and I kind of miss those days, but nowadays the internet is all about look at me specifically. So the idea of anonymity being a core concept is relegated to pretty much just the dark web. Now, despite the fact that there was this layer of anonymity with IRC chat rooms, it was actually quite common to, quote-unquote, find love while chatting with these people. There was a direct messaging system too, so you could have conversations one-on-one, and you could get to know the person on the other end pretty well, even if there was no way to confirm literally anything they told you or said. I'm certain that some of the people I spoke with that were interested in me were probably 60-year-old guys pretending to be women in their 20s. And that's okay. I could safely say that this was a long time ago, or that was the old me. Now, there was one person that I spoke with in these chat rooms that I actually did have a bit of a relationship with, albeit only for a couple of months. Her username was the title to an Evanescence song, with some X's and numbers thrown in the mix, but I can safely say that her actual name was Taylor. Taylor was a year older than me at the time. I was 21 and she had just turned 22 when we met, and had started speaking. I don't remember why we started talking one-on-one, but we did. And after a while, things seemed to get to a point where we both wanted to start a relationship. Now, long-distance relationships back then were a bit different than what they are in 2023. Long-distance phone calls were expensive, and cell phones had set text and talk minutes, so it wasn't like you could be as close to the other person as you can in the current year. Because of this, we had our IRC conversations, and we also had emailed each other a few times. And before anybody mentions that Taylor was probably one of the 60-year-old men that liked to roleplay as a young woman, I actually knew that Taylor was legit. We had sent pictures to each other, including pics to prove that we were real. This was essentially a picture with the date, time, and our username written on our hands in Sharpie and covering one of our eyes. Yes, things were that complex back then. You had to be creative to come up with something that was difficult to fake, to prove that you were who you said you were. Now, all of this is to say that Taylor was gorgeous. She was exactly what you would think of when I say 22-year-old girl with an Evanescence username that likes to talk in IRC rooms. Dyed black hair, bright blue eyes, liked the color black on everything, had a few face piercings, and let me tell you, I instantly fell in love with her. I even told her that she was literally the girl I was looking for in life, and she thought that that was the funniest thing ever. From there, we did say that we were dating, actually. We would chat every night, send pictures of ourselves through email, and while things never went past PG-13, this was the happiest I had ever been in my life. We had our little relationship for almost 3 months on the dot, and everything seemed great. Until there was a stretch of time that she just didn't log in. I didn't see her in our chat rooms, and I would email her, but she wouldn't reply. I was genuinely upset, thinking maybe something happened to her, maybe she wasn't really as interested in me as she had claimed. I was almost heartbroken, thinking I had messed this up, and that this was a once-in-a-lifetime thing that I had just ruined. I kept emailing her every night, just hoping she would see them or maybe send a response like, "Oh, my internet was out for a few days, sorry about that." Or, "I was out of town." I was basically holding out hope that she would say anything to bring it back together. And then, I did get a response, but it was a rather strange one. It was just, "Hey, hop on IRC." It actually made me almost giddy to hear from her again, so I did what she requested and logged in. Immediately, she sent me a DM saying hello. I replied, asking how she was and if she was okay. She completely ignored those messages and just said, "What's your address? I want to send you something." I have to pause here to say that I was dumb, and I was in love with this girl, so I didn't hesitate at all in giving this random internet person my address. Nowadays, I would be lambasted for doing something so stupid, and rightfully so, but back then, there really wasn't this concept of internet strangers are not your friend. So I responded to her, told her my address, thinking that this was maybe the start of us moving into something a little more serious. And of course, the response that I got back was not what I expected, nor what I wanted. The message that I got back from Taylor was clear as day, and I actually remember it word for word. "This is Taylor's husband. Stop messaging my girl, or else you'll be next." And that was it. What I would be next for was anybody's guess, but this was pretty clearly a threat. I mentioned that she never told me she was married, and then mentioned that she and I were really good friends, and if he was really her husband, I would respect that. After a few moments of silence, they logged out of the account, leaving me confused, devastated, and just overall feeling kind of betrayed. That was the last time that I ever spoke with that account. They never logged back into the server, and Taylor never responded to any of my emails. So, that was effectively the end of my relationship, but not the end of the story. About 2 weeks later, I actually got a package at my house. The return address just said Taylor. There was no address or city or anything like that. It was just her name. I hesitated to opening it, thinking that it was going to be something messed up, and, well, it was. When I opened the box and moved all the packing materials, there at the bottom of the box was a kitchen knife, and on the blade of the kitchen knife was a hard, crusty brown-red substance that I assume was blood. I immediately called the police, asking them to send an officer to my house because I had gotten a package with a potential murder weapon. That was a really fun story to try to explain to the officer when he got there, not going to lie. I had to tell him that I had met a girl on the internet, and that we were dating, but then her real-life husband had threatened me after I gave him my address, and then today the package showed up. I feel like if I had to tell this story to an officer this year, it would be less strange. But back in 2003, it was like explaining foreign concepts, and they had a lot of questions. I ended up having to go to the station to pretty much be interrogated, And after answering questions for about 4 hours, they decided that I was probably telling the truth, and they took the knife, saying that they would look further into it. I don't know what they were looking into. All I had was her first name, online username, and a picture of her. I have no idea if their investigation ever went anywhere, nor do I know if that blood was human. But it was definitely sent to me as a threat, and it told me what he meant when he said I was next. All of this was 20 years ago, and looking back, I do kind of miss the old internet. Hopefully this can trigger some nostalgia for your older audience and maybe educate your younger audience on how things used to be. Remember, kids, don't tell strangers where you live, or you may end up with a bloody knife in your mailbox.
The story takes place when I was 19 years old. At the time, I was dating a guy, 19 male, and had been for only a couple of months. My parents had left on a trip to visit family in the United States. I grew up in Mexico. I decided to sneak my then boyfriend into my house and spend the weekend with me while they were gone. I never would have expected what happened. My parents had left me their car, and my boyfriend used to be a professional level bodybuilder and trainer and knew a lot of shady people. One night he tells me this friend wants to meet up in the city, an hour's drive from the town we lived in. As I was the one with the car, I was down to drive him and meet his friend. We meet in a shady bar in a so-so part of the city. I was instantly uncomfortable with this guy. He was too familiar, too comfortable, too obnoxious to everyone, myself included. All of a sudden, after a private talk outside between him and my boyfriend, who I'll call A, approaches me and says that we need to give him a ride back to my place. I'm sorry, I'm not comfortable with this. He was a bit nervous and tells me quietly to hush. This isn't someone that we could afford to offend. I asked him why he can't drive, to which he told me he's too intoxicated and needed a private setting to talk to him. As dumb as I was, I ended up agreeing. I was very uncomfortable and had this terrible feeling the whole way home, which my boyfriend drove. We get home, they sit outside, and suddenly this man starts demanding I cook him dinner. I was a very obstinate teen. I hated and still do being told what to do. As I begin to deny him, A looks at me, a bit pale, and shakes his head. I go in, fuming at the order and feeling bossed around in my own home, and make a simple dinner. After the dude left, I learned from my boyfriend that he was the head narco of our city. The head honcho. I was livid that he brought this guy to my family's home. He was very pushy and without words, slightly threatening, so I very much feel like I had made a mistake. It very well could have ended terribly for me. My wife passed away after many years of battling an awful disease. We were married for 13 years, and after several months of not being able to find my footing, I made the decision to move out of state and start a new chapter to force myself into beginning a new life. I was immediately validated by starting my first job in over 8 years. Things slowly began moving forward, and after prodding from my friends, I signed up for a mobile dating app. I met a couple of people I didn't really have a lot of chemistry with. The first date I went on was cordial, but not of any consequences. She wound up asking me to fix a laptop she had. The second person I met called me and we decided to meet for Chinese food. Since I don't have a car, I walked about 5 or 6 blocks, but not before it started to rain. She had already sat at a table and was waiting for me to arrive. We exchanged pleasantries, and soon it's all about her divorce and why she lost her kids and all the legal proceedings of her case. And then she would pause, clasp my hand on the table, turn her head, lean in a bit and say, "But nothing compared to what you went through. tell me about your dead wife." Like clockwork, she would ramble on about the craziest stuff, about how they're all trying to get her, and then she stops the crazy babbling to ask me details about how bad it felt, and my poor wife's decline in condition. I had only put on my profile that I was a widower, nothing else. It was at that point that I got seriously weirded out, deep in my gut, fully weirded out. What I couldn't figure out was if she was trying to mimic what she thought a sensitive person would be like, or was there a possibility that she wanted to know those painful, graphic details for other perverted reasons, and made short work of the entree and paid the entire check. She called me on my phone a few times, and I made several excuses why I was unable to meet again. I got a couple of calls from a blocked number that didn't say anything, but they stopped after a month or two. I'm blessed and remarried, but I'm so grateful I noped the F out that night and never messed with that lady again. This happened back in March. I met this guy on a dating site, and let's just call him Jay for the rest of the story. Anyway, we chatted for a while on the site and exchanged numbers and chatted for about a week or two until he asked me out. Even before we met up, he just gave a creepy vibe and was asking some really weird and sexual questions. But I'm the type of person who gives people chances. Anyway, the day of the date, and from the moment we met at the Starbucks, it went downhill from there. He was very creepy and trying to touch or hold my hand, asking me strange questions, and just making me feel uncomfortable. Saying that he was going to take me on vacation and that we were going to have a blast. In my mind, this dude had lost his marbles. I kept looking down on my phone to see if my cousin was on her way. She was my lift home, but there was no text. At that point, he was like, "Why don't you sit in my car?" I was looking at him like, what the fuck is wrong with this guy? So I responded, "I don't think so." Thankfully, my cousin texted me that she was outside, so I told him. He was like, "Oh, I cleaned out my car and was gonna give you a lift home." I didn't say anything to him on our way out. We just stood there and he tried to come closer to me. I asked him, "What are you doing?" And he's like, "I was gonna kiss you." Anyway, I said bye to him and get into my cousin's car, and her son is in the back seat and he's 11 years old. He goes to his car, and my cousin takes off, and next thing you know, my cousin turns around and says he's following our car. I started to panic for a moment, but my cousin kept going down the street. I told her to turn to a gas station and see if he keeps following us in there, or if he keeps going straight. Thankfully, he kept going straight. Anyways, everything was okay after that, and I never went out with him again.
I actually have 2 dating stories that should be pretty quick, hopefully. And they're not necessarily horror as in scary, but they're horror in the sense that they were horrifying and turned me off online dating pretty much altogether. I don't think much backstory is really needed for me, beyond the fact that I was in my mid-20s, have never really had luck with meeting people that I care to really spend time with, and I wasn't exactly picky with who I swiped match on. When I say that I wasn't picky, I mean that as long as they were a guy above a 2 on a scale of 10 and didn't throw out any major super creep vibes, I was pretty willing to give them a try. I know that this may sound pretty dumb to some people, but I'm the kind of person that is really willing to give anyone a shot to see if we vibe, if that makes sense. Anyways, on to the first date story. I had matched with a guy named Jake on one of the apps, and he seemed like a pretty straightforward guy. His profile was your basic mid-20s dude that was into tech and fitness, 2 things that were actually bonuses for me. He and I spoke for a while, sent a few photos, had a few phone calls, and he was pretty much the most average guy I've ever spoken with. I was totally okay with average. In fact, that's kind of what I was looking for more than anything. We agree to meet up for lunch at a small diner-like restaurant, and we set a date. The day comes, I show up first, and I get the table for the two of us. As I'm sitting there, just waiting, I get a text from Jake saying that he's had some car troubles and that he's going to be a few minutes late. But he was 100% not ghosting me. That was fine with me. I get it. I've had my shares of why won't my rust bucket start moments. I tell him I'm at the table and that it's totally fine, that I understand, and so forth and so on. After about 20 or so more minutes, he finally does walk into the restaurant and to our table. But he looks like he's having a panic attack. He's sweating. It was early spring, so it was still pretty chilly outside, and he just looked distressed and disheveled overall. He sits down and immediately just kind of looks like he's lost all sense of the situation. Like something has happened, and he's freaking out. But he can't make it not obvious that he's freaking out. I ask him if he's okay and what's going on, and he kind of just starts looking at me like he's about to start sobbing. As soon as this happens, I hear shouting. I see several cops running into the restaurant, telling him to get down on his knees and subsequently arresting him. It took me a few minutes to convince them that I was already there at the restaurant and that I was not with him prior to the minute he walked in. Thankfully, the host and server could vouch for me on this, as come to find out, on his way to the date, Mr. Jake had actually hit someone with his car and then kept going. I don't mean like he sideswiped or bumped somebody else's vehicle. I mean he literally hit a person and ran over their leg, causing major injury, and then kept going to meet up with me at the restaurant. I'm assuming I was supposed to be an alibi, or I guess I would have been if he hadn't already been being followed and looked for by the police. So, obviously, that date ended pretty quickly with him being shoved in the back of a police cruiser and me just staring at the floor like, what the hell am I doing with my life? Thankfully, the waiter was sympathetic, and she didn't make me pay for my drink, which was nice. I guess at least I got a free Dr. Pepper out of the situation. The second one is one that's not necessarily scary, but it's still what I would consider a dating horror story. It was, once again, a story where I met up with a guy that I had met on one of those dating apps. This one was a dude named Chris. Chris's profile was a bit above the others that I looked at on the apps, because Chris was actually really attractive, and he was all about staying fit, as he claimed he was former military. Now, I've never been with a military guy, but I do know a few of them. My brother, for one, and I have found that most of them are fairly tolerable, and even pretty fun to hang out with. Talking with Chris went pretty smoothly, at first, though he seemed to have a really strict, I can't chat with you before 8 p.m. kind of schedule about him, which, admittedly, had me initially concerned that he may have been a married man looking for an affair. I figured I would at least see it through to the first date, and see if I could spot an indentation on his ring finger, or try to ask him what it was all about. I mean, it could have been that he had a job that he worked until then and couldn't have his phone with him. Or maybe he just had other adult responsibilities that he had to see to. I was willing to be patient with him and to get answers, so we scheduled a date for dinner. That 8 p.m. rule made it kind of hard to do anything else, and I was looking forward to it. Once again, I was early to the date, and I got a table for us. Then, when he finally shows up to the date, he walks in with another woman. I was a bit confused and taken aback, thinking he really had the audacity to bring someone else to a date like that. But it was even more awkward when he sat down and said, "It's very nice to finally meet you in person. This is my mother." This man literally brought his mother on the date without warning me. Now, mind you, if his mother had needed his care or been disabled, I would have had no issue with it, assuming he probably would have informed me beforehand. But this woman was quite fit and definitely able to take care of herself. And she was definitely there because she wanted to be there. Which was even weirder. At no point did Chris stop and think or act like this was a weird thing. He just kept up the conversation as if she wasn't there. Then, it hit the apex of, oh my god, this is so freaking awkward, when it came time to order. He tried to order one thing, and his mother told him no. Then, told the waiter something else. When the waiter walked away, he tried to tell his mom that he wanted the other thing, almost whining like a little kid. But she told him that it was too fatty and that he needed to watch his carbs. I just kind of sat there like, what? Was this woman really ordering for her adult, former military son like this while he was on a date with another woman? Again, I know that this wasn't scary, but it was definitely my, nope, I'm done with this moment. The entire date was so strange, and I pretty much ghosted him after this. I tried to think that maybe I was just being shallow about the whole thing, but it was too much. Chris was actually my last date through any of those apps, and I kind of just embraced being single for a while, for reasons that I think are pretty obvious.